Hey guys, tonight we begin with the hush of tatami mats and the clink of morning tea in a feudal pleasure quarter. You're not waking up to birdsong or the distant hum of a rice field. No, your morning begins in the heart of a walled compound, Yoshiwara, Kyoto's Shimabara, or one of the countless lesser-known quarters where the world outside dissolves behind velvet screens. The air here smells faintly of camellia oil and fading incense from last night's rituals, still curling in the wooden beams above your head. Someone far away hums an old song about a lovesick samurai. You're already tired, and the sun has barely cleared the roof tiles. You're a junior courtesan, a concubine in training, really not yet among the high ranks like the glittering Taiyu, but no longer scrubbing floors with the kitchen girls either. You sleep on a mat that's thinner than the status you cling to in a shared chamber where 4 others dream beside you. One murmurs in her sleep. Another is already awake, staring blankly at the ceiling eyes, calculating. You'll rise soon like everyone else, but only after listening carefully for the footsteps of the oiran above. When she moves, everyone moves. There's no alarm clock here, just cues. The soft rustle of kimono silks. The sudden twang of a shamisen as the house musician begins morning warm-ups. A servant tiptoes past with a tray of barley tea and pickled radish. You don't get to choose what you eat, when you eat, or whom you smile at. But you do get to notice everything. That's your first skill observation. The hierarchy here is steeper than a mountain path, and one misstep could send you tumbling to the bottom. Even now, as you sip your bland tea and adjust your sleeping robe, you're calculating. Will the favoured guest return today? Has the senior mistress softened to you after last week's poetry recitation? Did the guest you secretly like ask about you again? Or did he forget your name, like he forgets his wine debts? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Invite viewers to post their location and local time. You stretch your legs beneath the covers and glance toward the paper screen. On the other side is a world of performance politics and perfumed warfare. But for now it's quiet, almost sacred, almost. The wooden floors creak softly as one of the senior girls rises, her movements fluid and silent, honed by years of walking on tiptoes. She nods at you, not a greeting, not quite approval either, just acknowledgement. You're here, you're one of them. For now. You remember what the senior tutor said your first night. Don't smile too much, it looks cheap. Don't laugh unless someone else does first. And never ever speak before spoken to. A fun set of rules for someone whose entire job is to charm the uncharmable. And still there's something mesmerizing about it all. The lacquered furniture glints in the first slivers of daylight. A trailing sleeve flutters in the breeze from the bamboo window slats. Somewhere a client is waking up in his own house, wondering if you meant what you whispered last night. You didn't. Not really. But that's the art, isn't it? Scholars remain divided on whether women in your role wielded more agency than expected, or were merely better paid prisoners. Some argue that courtesans, especially those in the upper ranks, could influence fashion, poetry, even politics. Others point to the strict contracts, physical confinement, and limited exit options as proof of elaborate entrapment. You, of course, don't have the luxury of philosophy. You have appointments, lessons, competition. You know the day ahead will be long. You'll bow dozens of times, paint your face until it doesn't feel like yours, memorize more names than you'll ever forget. You'll smile, tilt your head just so, and then maybe, if you're lucky, you'll sleep again. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sliding door stirs. The morning has begun. You've barely finished your barley tea when it begins the bright, almost metallic clang pluck of the shamisen upstairs. The oran's personal musician is warming up, and every note ricochets through the paper-thin floors like gossip skipping across the courtyard pond. You sit up straighter. If she's rehearsing, the house wants everyone alert, polished, and preferably not yawning like a bored temple cat. Your futon is rolled away by an attendant who moves so quietly you'd swear she's part ghost, part folding furniture. She bows, slips out, and you and the other junior courtesans shuffle into a neat line, eyes down, yet each girl stretching her neck ever so slightly to glimpse the stairs. The hierarchy here is visual. Long before anyone speaks, head angle, sleeve length, the distance of your hairpins from the scalp. It's like a silent peacock contest. And spoiler alert, the judges are ruthless. One mainstream fact. The shamisen itself only arrived in Japan about a century earlier, adapted from the Chinese Sanxian via the Ryukyu Islands. By Edo times, its three strings were the soundtrack of the pleasure quarters. Think of it as a 17th century jukebox, except you can't kick it when it skips. Experts still debate whether its rapid popularity came from geisha virtuosity or from daimyo with too much rice tax money and not enough Spotify. You tiptoe along the corridor toward the dressing room. Every board in this building squeaks in a subtly different pitch like a bamboo piano. You've learned which notes announce you without sounding desperate. The older girls listen. They can tell the difference between a squeak of confidence and a squeak of oops. I overslept, please, don't demote me. Inside a mirror of polished metal waits. Your reflection glances back, a face half-painted from last night, lips like faded lacquer. Time for the daily transformation. First, a dab of Binske Abura, that sticky hair wax made from camellia oil, and if rumour is true, the tears of every apprentice who ever tried to rinse it out. Light joke number 1. You could probably waterproof a whole fishing boat with this stuff. Somewhere a clever merchant is missing an opportunity. A senior dresser circles you, layering vibrant underrobes, scarlet under white indigo, under pale peach. Each hue signals status and season. Spring greens aren't allowed until after the first plum blossoms, unless of course you enjoy the thrill of disciplinary poetry, those passive-aggressive haiku that call you tacky, in 17 impeccably measured syllables. While your sleeves multiply, you eavesdrop on the chatter drifting in from the courtyard. Apparently, the tea master spilled a kettle. A samurai patron left a lacquer comb as payment, which is generous, but also last week's fashion, and someone's pet macaque escaped its tether again. Fringe tidbits: certain upper-class visitors in the late Edo period actually brought trained monkeys as comic relief, like walking in with a live meme. One daring creature supposedly stole an entire tray of sweets and bowed before bolting across the roof tiles. The story changes each retelling, but confectionery vanishing acts are surprisingly common in these parts. Kimono finished, you kneel for hairstyling. This is truly acrobatic work. 2 attendants wield combs like dueling swordsmiths, building ridges, loops, and a structure sturdy enough to withstand minor earthquakes. Joke number 2. If the big one ever hits Edo, your coiffure might double as emergency scaffolding. Gold-tipped kanzashi hairpins slide in each, a miniature billboard advertising your rank, availability, and mood. Today, you pick the chrysanthemum motif, elegant, not too flashy, and hopefully immune to the manager's critique that your last pin made you look optimistic, which apparently is a terrible strategic flaw. All the while, the shamisen tempo upstairs accelerates. You feel it in your ribs, a rhythmic reminder that the oran's performance sets the tone for the house income, which in turn sets the tone for your supper ration. No pressure. Somewhere in the hallway, wooden sandals clatter the bookkeeper doing head counts. She pauses, sticks her abacus around the doorframe. Eyes you counts, lacquer pins, then retreats. That little bead click means your debt ledger just nudged higher. Every hair ornament is charged back to you, plus operational interest. Light joke number 3, by the time you pay it off, the shogunate might have invented air conditioning. So look forward to that. You descend toward the reception hall, careful not to let your sleeves brush the inked wall scrolls. The fragrance of sandalwood drifts up. The servant boys have started the incense. Fans folded paper contraptions, waving perfumed air around like lazy butterflies. You practice your half-smile, the one conveying mystery, sincerity, and absolutely no opinions about current rice prices. Meanwhile, the room buzzes with predictions. Will the daimyo show? Will the rich city merchant outbid him for tonight's company? One of the girls whispers that the merchant brings pickled garlic as a lucky snack. Everyone silently hopes he'll keep lucky inside his own sleeve. At a lull, you tuck your hands into opposite sleeves, classic, modest pose, and tilt your head, slipping the CTA into the moment, as naturally as steam rising from a tea bowl. Whisper 1 in the comments below, if this tale charms your heart, or 2, if it sends shivers down your spine. You let the invitation float like verbal incense, then glide onward. A door slides open. The house mother appears, eyes sharp enough to carve calligraphy. She inspects your posture, adjusts a single fold at your collar, then nods the unspoken acceptable. Relief zips through your spine. Not perfection, but close enough to avoid extra kneeling practice tonight. Before stepping onto the tatami, you remember a lingering scholarly puzzle. Some historians argue that lower-rank attendants had informal freedom after curfew, slipping out for brief street strolls, while others insist the gates closed. So, Tighter cricket couldn't squeeze past. The truth you suspect lies somewhere between, depending on who was on guard and how well he liked crickets. You inhale, smoothing your expression into serenity. The shamisen's final trill hangs in the air like a question mark. Showtime. Your world condenses to measured breaths, controlled footsteps, and the razor-thin line between allure and overreach. And if you're wondering, yes, you can feel sweat beading at the nape beneath that monumental hairdo, but you don't dare wipe it. Grace demands you let each drop carve its own secret path. Tomorrow, perhaps the laundry girl will discover a constellation of salt stains, and the gossip wheel will turn again. The sliding screen parts. Light pools across the woven mats. You step forward, eyes lowered just enough heart, thudding a tempo older than any shamisen riff. Welcome to the dance behind the velvet screens. Good luck keeping your balance. You take exactly 3 steps into the chamber. Slow, deliberate toes turn slightly inward sleeves, brushing your sides like reluctant wings. You stop precisely where the reed mat changes pattern and kneel with practiced elegance. The floor beneath you is cool and unforgiving, like the glances of the senior girls watching from the corridor. They're always watching. Not to cheer you on, of course, but to catalogue every slip, every blink that lingers too long. The patrons haven't arrived yet. This is rehearsal not for dancing or singing, but for posture presence and psychological endurance. You're here to be evaluated by a committee of silence. 3 senior concubines sit on a raised dais, sipping tea with eerie synchronicity, their eyes darting like dragonflies. One taps her fan twice. That's the signal. Begin. Your task. Pour tea. That's it. But of course it's never just tea. There's the correct way to unfold the cloth to hold the pot, so the handle aligns with the guest's dominant hand to bow, without your forehead touching the floor, but low enough to suggest it could. This choreography has been passed down from courtesan to courtesan for generations, slightly changed each time like a centuries-old game of emotional telephone. One mainstream historical fact here, tea ceremony Chinoyu, was not merely an art for monks or samurai. It was deeply embedded in the culture of the pleasure quarters, where even a concubine had to master its layered nuances. It was performance, ritual, flirtation, and test all in one. And the women who performed it weren't passive scholars, remained divided on whether their expertise was a means of agency or merely another trap dressed in silk and steam. You lower your gaze, pouring tea with the grace of falling rain. Not a drop spills, not a sound except the kettle's soft purr. And yet, despite your precision, you feel their unspoken critique too mechanical. Not enough soul. One lifts her teacup to hide a smirk. Still, you've done your part. You back away on your knees, resisting the urge to rub the ache blooming in your joints. Today's lesson is complete, but the judgment will echo through everything that follows: assignments, dress rank, access to better cosmetics. The room empties gradually, like steam rising off lacquerware. You remain behind, as instructed, to help tidy the incense stands and rewrap the ceremonial cloths. A soft breeze sneaks through the open window slats, carrying with it the distant clatter of a fishmonger's cart and the sharp scent of miso soup from a kitchen you'll never set foot in. You're reminded briefly that there is a world outside, fish scales and children's laughter and real hunger. But your hunger is different. It's layered like your kimono. Hunger for approval, for advancement, for even the illusion of choice. Fringe tidbit time among the lesser-known roles in a concubine household was that of the hanamiko or flower apprentice. These were girls as young as 8, trained not only in the art of decorum, but in how to smile in ways that didn't show teeth, because apparently smiling with teeth was considered too forward. One infamous tale tells of a girl who smiled too brightly at a visiting monk and was reassigned to floor-sweeping duty for an entire season. She later became head of the house, so it all comes full circle. As you tidy up, your mind drifts to the stories the other girls whisper late at night. The oiran who convinced a feudal lord to annul a marriage. The apprentice who wrote a haiku so moving that it was carved into a cherrywood panel. The ones who vanished, some married off, some simply gone. Joke number 1: disappearances in the quarters are like socks in laundry, frequent, unexplained, and everyone pretends not to notice. Your hands brush against a piece of folded silk left behind a handkerchief embroidered with a family crest. Someone's patron forgot it or left it deliberately. The difference is important. A forgotten gift is harmless. A deliberate one might mean trouble, especially if it's not meant for you. You tuck it away for the house mistress to handle. One does not make assumptions about silk gifts in this place. A bell rings from the reception hall. That's your cue. Guests are arriving soon. You'll be on display, not center stage, but artfully positioned in a side room, reading or writing, poetry accidentally overheard, discussing classical literature you barely understand. The patrons are meant to believe they've discovered you, that your intelligence and grace are secrets unlocked by their superior attention. It's a performance within a performance. Experts still debate whether these layers of curated spontaneity were empowering performances or mere survival theatre. One camp sees them as subtle subversion, the ability to control narrative through gesture and suggestion. Another claims the very illusion of choice was the cruelest trap of all. You don't bother choosing a side. You're too busy choosing the right ink for your next calligraphy scroll. You glance at the sun creeping toward midday. Your feet hurt. Your neck is stiff from holding your head just so. But your face, your mask is flawless. And that's what matters. You're stationed in the side salon now. A low table in front of you, a brush dipped in ink and a half-finished tanka poem, teasing you with its final line. The poem isn't for anyone yet, but it might be. If the right patron strolls by the one who appreciates subtle wit and calligraphy that swirls like smoke, you'll fold the paper just so, and let it drift into their line of sight like a cherry blossom on the wind. Pure coincidence, of course. Or so it seems. In this place, nothing is coincidence. You hear footsteps. Several pairs wooden sandals, slow and heavy, belong to a samurai. Quieter slippered ones are likely a wealthy merchant or court official. And then the louder clack of getter with a slight drag, someone drunk already or trying to pretend he isn't. You don't look up yet. That's not your role this moment. You're meant to be a vision glimpsed through a screen, a still life in silk. The paper door slides open an inch. A pair of eyes lingers. You recite the last line of your poem softly to yourself and brush a final stroke. The moment is planted. Whether it grows depends on who's watching. Mainstream historical fact here. The most elite courtesans in Edo period Japan weren't just entertainers or lovers. They were walking encyclopedias of the arts, fluent in classical poetry, shamisen performance, incense ceremony, and even political gossip. Some were more literate than the patrons who sought them out. In certain cases, a daimyo would defer to a taiyu's literary opinion before making decisions about art commissions or ceremonial phrasing. These women were ornamental only on the surface. Beneath that lacquered exterior was often a mind sharper than any katana. One of the guests passes by your room. He lingers too long. His breath smells faintly of plum wine and grilled eel. You keep your posture straight, your gaze low, and shift your brush ever so slightly enough to make the ink ripple as if from a breeze. He chuckles. The bait has been taken. Still, he moves on. You exhale without realizing you'd been holding your breath. That one isn't yours today. Probably for the best. His sandals squeak like arrogance. The air smells different now, incense mingling with citrus peels and a hint of powder. Another guest approaches, and this time someone stops outside your screen. You hear the rustle of silk, the low murmur of introductions. The house mother's voice ever calm, ever calculating. She is fond of Basho's later works, particularly those from his coastal journeys. A pause. Then the rustle of fabric as the screen slides farther open. You kneel, bow not too deeply, and meet his eyes for a single measured second. Just enough. He's older than expected. Not ugly, but not handsome. Tired eyes. Hands too clean for a samurai, too rough for a scribe. Perhaps a trader. His gaze flicks to your brush, then back to you. "May I read?" he asks. Of course, if you'll forgive the mess of ink. That's the trick, humility wrapped in subtle brag. He knows the ink is perfect. Fringe tidbits, some concubines in higher houses were trained to deliberately mess up one character in a poem just slightly. It made the rest of the composition seem more human, more soulful. Also, it allowed for future conversation when the guest came back and gently corrected it. A dance of mistakes all choreographed. You hand over the poem. He reads in silence. Then he nods just once and sets it back down with both hands. Respectful, intentional. He bows slightly. Not bad, but he doesn't ask to stay. Not yet, that's fine. Sometimes your job is to leave a mark, not collect one. You rise and take the paper back, folding it slowly. There's a stillness now as you sit again, but it's not empty. It's full of possibility. A good moment. And speaking of moments, tap 3 in the comments below if this story makes you smile, or 4 if it leaves you chilled. Back in the corridor, you overhear another girl arguing quietly with one of the attendants. Something about the wrong obi sash being sent for her appointment. A crimson one, instead of the pale lavender she requested. You wince. Crimson is for senior rank, and wearing it without permission is the social equivalent of strutting into court with someone else's family crest. The consequences won't be loud, but they'll be lasting. Scholars remain divided on whether courtesans used such wardrobe mistakes to assert quiet rebellion, or if the system itself baited them into these missteps as tests. One theory argues that the visual codes were so complex that occasional sabotage by jealous peers was inevitable, and sometimes encouraged by house mistresses, eager to stir competition. You know better than to interfere. You close your eyes briefly and recite a line from an old poem under your breath. The crane bows low but always sees the snake beneath the reeds. Another guest glides by uninterested, then another, and still you sit straight-backed serene like a sculpture waiting to be misread. The house isn't in chaos, but it's humming. There's something happening. You don't know what, yet, but you will. The fan in your sleeve grows warm with the heat of your hand. The ink dries in its tray. Somewhere your name is being discussed either favorably or ominously. The only question is where you'll be sent next to pour tea to dance or to endure another evening of pretending not to listen while everything is said around you. You smooth your sleeves and smile barely. The day is far from over. The summons arrives quietly as always. A subtle tap on the door frame, followed by the faintest clearing of a throat. You look up to see one of the younger attendants bowing low, not meeting your eyes. The mistress requests your presence, she murmurs, already backing away. You don't ask which mistress, you don't ask why. You simply rise, smoothing your kimono and adjusting the weight of your hairpins. There's no time for nerves-only readiness. The walk to the inner dressing room feels longer than it should, even though you've made it 100 times before. This part of the house always smells of lacquer incense, and something fainter burnt mandarin peel maybe. A calming scent meant to soothe or distract. The floorboards here are narrower polish to a mirror sheen. Every step is a reflection. You pass one of the senior girls in the corridor. Her face is unreadable, but her glance lingers a second too long. It's not a warning, more like curiosity or quiet sympathy. The dressing room is quiet. The senior mistress is waiting, flanked by 2 assistants with lacquered boxes. She doesn't smile, she rarely does. Her hair is an architectural feat of pins, and coils her robes layered with such precision you'd think she was painted into them. She gestures to the cushion before her. You kneel, bow low, and wait. I've decided, she begins, that you'll accompany the daimyo's envoy this evening. Ah, so that's it. She says it casually, like she's assigning you a chore. But the weight of her words lands like a stone in your gut. The envoy isn't just a guest, he's the guest. The one whose favor could change your future or ruin your present. You bow again, murmuring something like gratitude, though your heart's already fluttering like a moth caught in lamplight. Mainstream fact-visiting envoys of powerful lords were sometimes sent to the pleasure quarters, not just for entertainment, but to observe, report, or even test loyalty among the entertainers and house managers. These visits weren't all incense and flirtation. They were in many ways auditions. For everyone. As the assistants begin to dress you for the evening, you try to breathe evenly. Tonight, your kimono is a deep, violet, formal, reserved, edged in gold thread depicting cranes. Cranes, always cranes. Long life, grace, vigilance. You wonder if the envoy will know what they mean. You wonder if you even care. The sash is cinched tightly around your ribs, so tight you feel your pulse in your collarbone. You accept a dab of rouge, a brush of white rice powder to your neck, and finally the tiniest smear of plum petal pink across your lower lip. The effect is soft, restrained like poetry on the verge of silence. Fringe tidbits: certain houses trained their concubines to subtly mirror the aesthetic of their expected guests, colors, motifs, even speech patterns. It was considered a mark of refinement to become a kind of living poem, tailored to one man's taste. You're not sure if that's artistry or mimicry, probably both. When you stand, the full weight of the ensemble settles over your shoulders like expectation itself. You bow once more, deeper this time, and follow the assistant toward the guest chambers. You pass through 3 paper screens, 2 lantern-lit courtyards, and 1 suspiciously quiet kitchen hallway. The closer you get, the quieter it becomes, until all you can hear is your own breath and the faint clack of your sandals. Finally, the guest room. The door slides open. He's already inside, seated on a cushion sipping tea. Not a young man, but not ancient either. His robes are understated, but expensive. He doesn't look up right away. You bow deeply and kneel across from him, hands folded in your lap. He waits a moment longer before speaking. "I've read your poem," he says. You blink. So he was the one watching earlier. It was restrained, he adds, as if that's either a compliment or a provocation. You choose to treat it as both. Restraint is a kind of power, you reply gently. He studies you, not hungrily, not cruelly, just intently, like someone trying to remember where he's seen you before, though you both know he hasn't. He doesn't ask your real name. He never will. That's part of the game. You pour his tea, the motion so smooth it feels like memory. He sips, and then as casually as anything he asks, "Do you enjoy it here?" The question lands like a cracked teacup, not because of its content, but its delivery, as if he genuinely wants to know. You pause. Scholars still debate whether concubines ever had space to be honest in moments like this. Some argue they became masters of double-speak, layering truth beneath formality, signaling pain through elegance. Others suggest they said what was required, and only the most foolish believed their own performances. You choose your words with the care of someone walking on blades. It is a place of beauty, you say, and beauty always comes at a price. He doesn't nod. He just watches you a moment longer, then places his cup down with a soft click. "I'll request you again," he says. Then rising, he departs without ceremony. You remain still, the silence folding around you like a second robe. He didn't stay long. That's either a blessing or an omen. Possibly both. You stay kneeling long after the envoy departs, the tea cooling in its cup. The silence stretching thin and taut like a koto string. Your knees are going numb, but that's not why you're still. You're trying to decipher his tone, his gaze, the deliberate slowness with which he left. Was he disappointed? Intrigue testing. The trouble is every guest wears a mask and yours has to be shinier, more convincing. Finally, a whisper of movement, one of the attendants glides in to retrieve the tray. She bows, says nothing, and leaves. No verdict. Not yet. You rise slowly, joints stiff, legs tingling from the long kneel. You step outside the chamber into the cool corridor, where a gust of evening air brushes your cheek like a secret. The sun is dipping below the slatted eaves, casting long shadows across the tatami. The house is quiet, but there's a hum beneath it, a shift in the current, a ripple that suggests someone somewhere is now talking about you. Mainstream historical fact: in many high-end pleasure quarters of Edo Japan, patrons didn't always speak to the courtesan directly about their next visit. Instead, they'd leave coded messages, fan positions, or even the angle of their folded garments as cues. A certain placement of the sandal at the door could imply return interest, and in more elite houses, written requests were delivered via calligraphic messengers, deliberately cryptic, rich with layers. You see nothing yet. No sandal angle, no messenger. Just your own reflection in the lacquered pillar upright, elegant but tired. You return to the shared chambers, where the junior concubines are brushing out their hair and gossiping in hushed tones. They quiet when you enter, half respect, half curiosity. You give them nothing. Just a faint smile and a raised brow that says, maybe he stayed, maybe he didn't. Joke number one in this house. The less you say, the more interesting you become. Silence here is its own kind of seduction. You kneel at your mirror again, the rice powder smudged now, the lipstick worn thin. You reach for the cleansing cloth and pause. A note rests beside your brush. Not a scroll, not formal, just a folded square of paper unmarked. You unfold it with care, fingers trembling slightly, not out of fear, exactly, but the kind of anticipation you feel before a thunderstorm you can smell, but haven't yet heard. Inside, just 4 words. You were not unnoticed. No name, no signature, but the handwriting is elegant, precise, unmistakably official. Fringe tidbit: in some houses, anonymous notes were a form of protected admiration. A patron might fear political risk, or simply enjoy the tension of secrecy. There were even in-house scribes who would pen fake ones to boost a girl's morale or reputation. Of course, the scribes charged extra for believable ink styles. You fold the note and tuck it into the lining of your sleeve. Not because it means anything yet, but because it might. Behind you, another girl is whispering about a visitor who offered to buy her outright. She's pretending to be annoyed, but the corners of her mouth betray her. You offer no opinion. You just comb your hair, each stroke slow and rhythmic. 100 strokes before sleep. That's the rule. Not for beauty, but for control. Suddenly the house mistress enters. "Walk with me," she says. You don't hesitate. You follow her through a side door into the narrow corridor that leads to the rear garden. This path is rarely used, reserved for private conversations and punishment walks. You inhale the scent of moss pine and damp earth. A frog croaks somewhere near the stone lantern. She doesn't look at you as she speaks. He requested you again. You feel your breath catch. You manage a bow. "But not tonight," she continues. He wishes to observe. He wants to see how you interact, without the stage. A pause. "So," she says, "you'll attend tomorrow's poetry salon. No formal invitation. You'll act as if you've come of your own interest." You nod. "This is delicate. You're being tested again, but this time the test is subtler. There will be eyes on you. Not just his. The other patrons, the other girls, the house managers. Watching how you move, speak, smile. Whether you seem natural. Nothing here is natural." Scholars remain divided on the extent to which courtesans maintained autonomy within this web of calculated performance. Some point to diaries where women describe manipulating patron attention as a game of strategy. Others believe the structure was too rigid, the power dynamics too steep for true freedom. Your experience, of course, lies somewhere in between, where you're always choosing. But always from a menu someone else wrote. You and the mistress stop at the edge of the garden. Lantern light flickers over her face. For once she seems less a gatekeeper and more a weathered veteran. "You handled him well," she says softly. "But don't mistake interest for safety." You bow. "I understand." She nods once, then turns her sleeves trailing like the last line of a story you can't quite read. You remain for a moment longer, watching fireflies drift over the pond. Then quietly, you return to the house. There's a poem forming in your head, something about frogs and dusk, and being seen only in reflections. You'll write it later. For now, the night deepens, and you still have miles of silence to walk before sleep. The poetry salon isn't what you expected. You were picturing hushed elegance calligraphy scrolls, delicate snacks, shaped like maple leaves, soft-voiced patrons, pondering cherry blossoms, and moonlight metaphors. But what you walk into is closer to a well-rehearsed storm of practiced wit, suppressed egos, and enough passive-aggressive verse to fuel an opera. The room itself is beautiful, of course. Floor mats, swept lanterns, hung at precise intervals for mood. The scent of yuzu peel floats in the air. A shamisen rests in the corner, silent for now, like a tiger waiting to pounce. Around the central table sit 5 men and 3 women, 2 fellow courtesans and 1 older patroness, rumoured to be the widow of a rice magnate. Her silver hair is folded into a knot that could probably intimidate a general. You arrive unannounced, as instructed. You're careful to seem just surprised enough to be caught off guard, but not so flustered that it appears planned. A delicate balance. You smile, bow, and settle in with a brush and fresh paper, folding your sleeves neatly at your sides. No one says anything, but 3 heads turn slightly in your direction, including his. The envoy is here. He sits near the end of the table, not at the head, an interesting choice. He notices you, of course, but says nothing. No greeting. Just a faint flicker of recognition. Perfect. Mainstream fact poetry salons Utokai were popular among both aristocrats and the educated merchant class during the Edo period. These weren't casual affairs. They were structured, often theme-driven, and intensely competitive. One poem could elevate your reputation or destroy your mystique. The most skilled courtesans used them like salons of Europe, arenas of intellectual flirtation. The theme tonight, shadows before spring. Lovely. You dip your brush in ink and begin to write slowly, carefully. Not your best work on purpose. You want to seem thoughtful, measured, modest. The trick is to appear humble enough to draw curiosity, but competent enough to threaten no one yet. As the poems are passed around, each one read aloud by a rotating host, the atmosphere grows charged. Someone makes a clever metaphor about plum blossoms resisting winter. Someone else counters with an allusion to frozen roots dreaming of rain. Light joke number 1. Someone's obviously compensating for a lack of affection at home. When your poem is finally read, the room goes very still. It's a quiet verse about the outline of a sleeping crane, cast on a paper screen, silent still, but unmistakably alive. A ripple of nods. The patroness arches an eyebrow. Someone coughs. But the envoy doesn't react at all. Not until the next poem. It's his. And it opens with a direct image. A crane, pausing beneath a lantern, unsure whether it's been seen. Your heart skips. The duel has begun. Fringe tidbit poetic duels were an art form in themselves, especially in salons that allowed anonymous attribution. Courtesans and patrons alike traded verses in public, each pretending not to aim their words at any specific person. Entire romances, affairs, and feuds played out in seasonal metaphors and veiled references. One infamous exchange between a daimyo and a courtesan took place entirely through poems about frogs and wind, and ended in a 3-day house lockdown after a misinterpreted haiku caused offense. The rest of the evening plays like a chess match made of ink. You answer his poem, not directly, but with a new one, about footsteps across frozen ground melting slowly. He responds with one about a well hidden beneath fallen leaves. It goes on. No one else seems to notice, or they pretend not to. But the energy between you builds subtle and taut. Eventually the salon ends. Scrolls are rolled, snacks vanish, lanterns dim. People bow, exchange courtesies, and slip into the night. You make sure to leave last, but he's already waiting in the garden. You pause, half expecting him to speak. He doesn't. Instead, he holds out a folded paper. Another poem, an invitation. You take it, bow slightly, and leave without unfolding it. Timing is everything. Back in your chamber, you read it. Just one line. The crane knows the lantern was never truly out. You stare at it. Lips parted slightly. You're not sure whether to feel flattered or trapped. Experts still debate whether these poetic exchanges offered real agency to courtesans, or simply lulled them into deeper submission. Some scholars argue they allowed space for subtle rebellion. Others claim they reinforced romanticized obedience under layers of metaphor. Like everything here, the truth lies somewhere in the ink. Joke number 2. You used to think poetry was for lovers and scholars. Now you know it's also for spies, liars, and very polite seduction attempts. You tuck the note away and prepare for sleep. But you won't sleep, not really. Not when the envoy knows how to speak your language, and not when you've finally answered in kind. Sleep barely visits you that night. You lie on your side beneath the weight of your quilted coverlet eyes, half closed yet wide awake inside. Your body rests out of necessity, but your thoughts pace the corridors of your mind like restless sentries. You replay the envoy's poem again and again. The crane knows the lantern was never truly out. You think about the paper it was written on, the ink's slight smudge where the brush lingered too long. Was it hesitation or emphasis? By morning your eyes are dry and your posture is stiff, but your smile is as smooth as lacquer. You rise, roll your mat, and join the quiet morning rituals. The usual banter among the junior girls seems louder today. Either you're more sensitive than usual, or someone's been whispering about you already. One of them, Akiko, the youngest, with the loudest laugh, glances at you and sing-songs. Somebody got a poem. You don't respond. You don't need to. Silence is a stronger reply than protest. As you sip your barley tea, the house mistress enters. Everyone straightens up instinctively. She glances around, then calls your name. You'll be serving the afternoon guest tea today, she says. That's all she says. But it's enough. You bow and excuse yourself. In your chest, your heart kicks once, twice, like a startled deer. Afternoon guest. Not an afternoon guest. The mainstream historical fact elite concubines in feudal Japan rarely had full schedules. Unlike the lower ranks, who might attend to several patrons a week, high-ranking women might see only one patron per month, if that. Appearances were deliberately scarce to maintain mystery and exclusivity. Availability was a game of suggestion, not obligation. Your day begins again with layers. A subtler kimono today, slate grey with violet undertones embroidered with willow branches. Soft, elegant, slightly melancholic. You choose an obi the colour of tea leaves and a single chrysanthemum hairpin. Simple but deliberate. Fringe tidbit, some houses maintained books cataloguing each girl's outfit so repeat colours could be avoided during repeat encounters with the same guest. It was said to be bad luck to wear the same hue twice before the moon changed. Joke number 1. Imagine having your entire wardrobe managed by a poetry-obsessed accountant with a fondness for floral metaphors. Actually, don't imagine it. That's your actual life. You arrive at the tea room just before the appointed time. The incense is already lit. Sandalwood and orange peel, and a tray of confections has been set out, sweetened red bean matcha jellies, and a small pickled plum for contrast, all of it perfectly curated for someone who likely won't eat a bite. He arrives without fanfare. He steps in like someone used to commanding silence. He bows just enough, and you return it with the perfect balance of humility and ease. This isn't your first performance, but something about it feels less like acting today. You serve the tea in silence, not a word exchanged. He observes your every movement not with hunger but with calculation. He's studying your grace, your choices, not your beauty. He's already decided how he feels about that. When he finally speaks, it's not with flirtation. You've been here long. You nod slightly, long enough to forget what seasons feel like outside these walls. He smiles just barely, and yet you remember how to write about shadows. You pour more tea. Writing is remembering, you say. He nods. And then the moment hangs. Not awkwardly, just delicately, like a spider's thread catching the light. Scholars remain divided on how much emotional investment patrons placed in courtesans. Some believe these interactions were deeply performative, an exchange of roles like theatre. Others argue that the intimacy, however constructed, often blurred into something real, however transient. You wonder which scholar would understand this particular moment, because this moment feels real. You intrigue me, he says, finally. You respond, that's my profession. He leans forward. Do you ever wish it weren't? The question hangs there heavier than it should be. It's not part of the script. He's not supposed to ask that. You hesitate. Then answer, wishing is for girls with choices. There it is, your truth nestled inside formality. He says nothing, but you catch a flicker in his eyes, a kind of regret or maybe just awareness. As if for the first time he realizes you're not just a beautiful riddle designed for his amusement. Joke number 2. You thought you were playing him, but perhaps you're both pieces in someone else's game entirely. He finishes his tea, sets down the cup. I'll see you again, he says softly, and then with the same quiet elegance as before he's gone. You sit alone for a long time after staring at the empty cup. The steam's long faded, but the shape of the moment lingers like the scent of incense on silk. Later, as you walk back to your quarters, the house mistress passes you in the corridor. She doesn't speak, but her eyes flicker toward your sleeve, the one where you hid his first poem, and her mouth twitches into something between suspicion and approval. You bow, because you know now you were not unnoticed, was not a compliment. It was a warning. The days blur after that. Not from monotony, no, monotony would be a luxury. You'd kill for a week of predictable guests and bland tea ceremonies. But lately everything feels calibrated. Each conversation rehearsed behind fans. Each glance from a senior girl a little too measured. Even the incense smoke seems to drift with intent. And you now, unmistakably the one he requested, walk a narrow ridge between favour and threat. You've become a symbol. And symbols, as you know, are either adored or replaced. Your name, still not your real one, of course, is whispered more often now. Not in praise, not in insult, just spoken like a lit match flicked into a dark hallway. Curious girls peek around corners. Guests mention you to attendants, pretending it's in passing. And worst of all, the younger concubines have started watching how you eat, sit, fold your sleeves. You've become a template, which is just another kind of prison. This morning there's a surprise lesson. Not from the usual etiquette tutor, but from one of the elder Wyron, semi-retired, half-legend, full danger. Her name is Kaho, and rumour says she once had the shogun's cousin write her a 1,000-line poem about her eyebrows. You're not sure if that's true, but you are sure that when she enters the room, even the house mistress bows. She beckons you alone. You follow, heart steady but stomach doing nervous cartwheels. You've attracted attention, Kaho says, once you're seated on the tatami across from her. She speaks with the weight of someone who's seen the rise and fall of hundreds. Mainstream historical fact retired, courtesans often served as instructors within elite houses. They were gatekeepers of memory and tradition, and occasionally enforcers of unspoken rules. Their word, though unofficial, held enormous power. You don't want to be too interesting, Kaho continues, watching you the way a hawk watches a fish pretending to be a rock. A good concubine gives her patron enough mystery to return, but not enough to wonder who she'd be if he weren't there. You offer a polite nod. Not too submissive, not too challenging. Just enough. Kaho pulls out a small lacquer box and opens it. Inside are 3 folded fans, each one painted differently. One with irises, one with fireflies, one with falling snow. She slides them toward you. Choose. You pause, think, then pick the fireflies. Kaho raises an eyebrow, amused. Bold. They don't live long, but they shine in the dark. Fringe tidbit fan symbolism was a serious matter in elite circles. Certain motifs conveyed moods, intentions, even messages between guests and courtesans. A plum blossom fan might suggest resilience. A crane meant loyalty. Fireflies, though, those were trickier. Beauty and brevity, hope and vanishing light. You'll carry this tomorrow, she says, but not open it unless he speaks of home. You nod, folding it carefully. Joke number 1. Your life is now governed by rules about hypothetical conversations with men who speak in riddles. And yet it's somehow more structured than high school group projects. As you rise to leave, Kaho stops you with one last phrase. Don't forget he's a guest. You are not. The reminder lands heavy. Later that afternoon, as you sit by the koi pond, trimming a sheet of rice paper into perfect squares, you overhear 2 attendants whispering behind the garden screen. Do you think she'll be chosen? Not yet. But she's already too known. Too known. Not famous. Not favored. Just seen. And being seen is dangerous here. Scholars still debate whether courtesans ever had meaningful exit strategies. A few married into wealth. Some became mistresses for life. Many more faded back into anonymity, into illness, into secondary roles within the house. Records rarely tell what happened next. You try not to think about what next looks like. Not now. Instead, you focus on tonight's duties, assisting in the incense-matching game for a visiting scholar and his equally dusty friends. It's tedious work, but safe. You smile, nod. Let them guess sandalwood from aloeswood, while you time your blinks for maximum serenity. The envoy does not appear. Neither does a message. That's the worst part. You're now important enough to be anticipated, but not prioritized. Joke number 2. Congratulations, you've reached the emotional equivalent of being someone's favorite pen, fondly remembered, but easily misplaced. As you prepare for bed that evening, you catch your reflection in the mirror again. Same powder-dusted skin, same precisely parted hair, but your eyes, they look more alert, not anxious, just awake. You brush your hair 50 strokes in each direction, not the usual 100. Tonight your arms ache. Before sleep you unfold the firefly fan once, briefly, just to see it in full. Then you close it, and lie awake wondering whether light is worth the wings it burns. Morning arrives like a whisper sliding between the bamboo slats with the cool breath of early spring. You wake not to the usual shamisen tune or tea tray clatter, but to silence. Not ominous exactly, just expectant. Like the moment before the first raindrop hits your sleeve. You sit up slowly, rubbing your arms, where last night's dreams still cling like damp silk. You don't remember what they were about, only that you woke gripping the edge of your blanket, like it might float you away. As you rise, your eyes find the folded firefly fan resting on your lacquered box. The light from the window hits it just right, making the painted wings shimmer faintly. You were told to bring it only if he speaks of home. You pack it anyway. There's no breakfast this morning, just a quick sip of barley tea and a single pickled plum offered by an attendant who avoids eye contact. That's never a good sign. Either she's been scolded, or she's been told not to speak freely. As you adjust your obi, you notice the other junior girls watching you again. Today, there's no teasing. Just a quiet, careful hush. Like you've become part of the architecture. Something to be observed, not touched. Mainstream historical fact, many high-ranking courtesans lived under strict surveillance, especially when entangled with political figures. Movements, conversations, even expressions were monitored not just by house officials but by servants, guards, sometimes even the patrons themselves. Freedom of movement was largely an illusion, packaged neatly in brocade and poetic ambiguity. Your assignment today is to serve tea and conversation in the veranda room overlooking the inner courtyard. You've done this before too many times to count. But today something feels different. When you arrive, the doors are already open. The late morning sun filters through the washi paper windows, casting soft geometric shadows on the floor. And there he is, the envoy seated, cross-legged hands resting on his knees, staring not at you but at the koi pond below. You enter quietly, kneel and bow. He gestures slightly, wordlessly, inviting you to sit. Minutes pass before either of you speaks. Finally, he murmurs, "You ever miss the sound of birds?" That's it. No greeting, no flattery, just that. And with those words, he's done it. He's spoken of home, his presumably, but also yours, or the one you no longer remember well enough to miss. So you reach into your sleeve and unfold the fan, resting it on the table between you. Fireflies in soft silver and pale gold dance along its folds. He notices. Says nothing. Then they used to swarm outside my window in summer. Hundreds. My little sister would catch them in a jar. You nod. I chased them once. Thought they were pieces of the moon falling. He chuckles. A real one this time. Not practiced. You pour his tea. This time, he takes it with both hands. Respectfully. Gratefully. Fringe tidbit in elite circles. The act of serving tea with a personal item, like a fan on the table, was a form of silent contract. It signaled openness. The guest could choose to engage meaningfully or walk away. You've opened a door today. Whether he steps through, that's his call. You've become well known, he says casually, but you know he means watched. I've become visible, you reply. It's not always the same thing. He studies you for a long moment, then asks the question. You hoped he wouldn't. Do you want out? That's not the game. That's never part of the game. Joke number 1. You'd rather be asked your blood type, your age, your opinion on poetry, scroll margins, anything but that. You answer carefully. What I want changes depending on who's asking. A pause. He nods slowly. That's a good answer. You're not sure if it's the one he wanted. Scholars remain divided on whether patrons truly understood the lives of the women they visited. Some diaries suggest genuine affection, and even attempts at liberation. Others read more like strategic acquisitions, women offered freedom only to be repackaged into private captivity. The stories with happy endings tend to be suspiciously vague. I could make an arrangement, he says. There it is. The offer, wrapped not in velvet or gold, but in implications and unspoken logistics. You keep your hands still, your voice calm. You say, but I'd still be someone's. He looks at you then, not with desire, not with pity, but with that same searching gaze he wore in the poetry salon, like a man trying to remember a dream that slipped away just before dawn. Joke number 2. Perhaps he's fallen for the version of you who only exists in verse and folded paper. You finish your tea. So does he. Then he rises. No final plea, no promise. Just a soft bow. I'll return, he says. You don't reply. Because sometimes silence is the most honest answer. When he leaves, the room feels strangely wider, as if something large has been removed, air pressure shifting. You remain seated, the firefly fan still open on the table. A breeze from the courtyard lifts one of its corners. Just slightly. You watch it flutter. Then you fold it away. Outside, a bird sings. You don't miss it. You just notice. The fan stays folded. You return it to its lacquered box with a kind of ceremony, wrapping it in a square of silk and sliding it beneath your underthings where no one would dare search. It's not just an accessory now. It's a secret. And secrets, as you've learned, are more powerful than beauty, more lasting than favor. Word spreads quickly, though no one says it outright. You were with the envoy again. He stayed longer this time. He didn't request entertainment. He didn't drink much. He left quietly, which in this world is suspicious. Too much silence is louder than scandal. You sense it in the way the girls glance at you from behind their makeup mirrors, in how the senior Oiren asks you to recite a poem you haven't studied yet, watching for any stumble, in how the tea server delivers your breakfast tray late with pickles that are slightly too sour, nothing overt, just the slow, careful application of pressure. A reminder rise too quickly and the ceiling lowers to meet you. Mainstream historical fact status among concubines wasn't just about appearance or patronage, it was a tightrope walk of alliances, performance, and emotional restraint. Even high-ranked women could fall, and when they did, it was often silent without ceremony. One day, you're at the front of the procession. The next, you're lighting incense for someone else's guest. This afternoon, you're assigned to attend the seasonal wardrobe sorting. It's not glamorous, but it's strategic. The silk room is where future outfits are chosen roles, implied narratives shaped through fabric. You and 3 other junior courtesans kneel around the open chests. The mistress is there, of course, with her ledger and her chalk-marked diagrams. You're told to assist, not choose. But you notice which garments are brought forward and which are quietly set aside. A gold-threaded kimono, embroidered with cranes. You glance at it. The mistress sees you looking. That one's reserved, she says flatly. You bow your head. Fringe tidbit in high-end houses, certain kimono patterns were considered sacred to patrons, symbols of shared history or prior ownership. Wearing one you weren't given permission for could result in severe punishment or worse, gossip. And gossip, unlike bruises, never fades. You help fold and stack quietly. No mistakes, no interruptions. But then one of the other girls, Yuki, accidentally tears a seam on a deep indigo robe. A tiny rip right at the shoulder. The room goes still. She gasps, apologizes immediately, bows 3 times. The mistress approaches slowly, not angry, just deliberate. Perhaps you're too tired to assist today, she says. Yuki is dismissed. Not harshly, just removed. But you see the lesson, clearly mistakes are recorded. Not always punished immediately, but never forgotten. Joke number 1, you used to think wardrobe management was about fashion. Turns out it's more like political chess with silk pieces. Later that evening you're excused from dinner. A privilege or a test? Hard to tell. You sit alone in the corner chamber with a small inkstone and a blank sheet of rice paper. You don't know what to write. A poem too obvious. A letter. To whom instead you write a riddle. A lantern stands at the edge of a lake. It does not burn, but it draws the moths anyway. You don't sign it. You just fold it neatly and slip it between the slats of the courtyard gate where messages are often exchanged. If he finds it, he'll know it's from you. If someone else finds it, well, that's part of the gamble. Scholars remain divided on whether courtesans used riddles and anonymous writings as genuine communication or strategic manipulation. One theory suggests such gestures were emotional pressure valves, safe ways to express the inexpressible. Another insists they were part of the carefully curated mythos, each woman built around herself, feeding intrigue like incense to a restless god. You prefer not to decide. You just needed to write something. As night falls, you hear the distant sound of laughter someone else is entertaining. Someone else is visible tonight, and you're grateful. Because hiding in this moment feels like the only power you still possess. Joke number 2. When your whole life is performance invisibility, becomes a kind of backstage pass. You lie down beneath your coverlet, staring up at the dark beams of the ceiling. There's a crack running between 2 planks. You've counted it before. 32 notches. You count them again just to anchor yourself. Outside, the wind stirs the bamboo. Inside, your breath is the only sound. You wonder if the envoy found your riddle. You wonder if it mattered. You wonder what happens next. Not tomorrow, but after all this. After the fans and poems and favors, no answers, just silence, and 32 tiny notches that somehow haven't changed at all. By dawn, the riddle is gone. You check the gate slit during your morning walk, the small space where folded paper offerings are sometimes left by guests, messengers, or bold courtesans. You left your message there last night, carefully angled a crane's leg away from the corner. Now it's empty. No note in return. No sign it was ever there. Just the faint imprint where the paper pressed against the wood grain. You feel a small shift in your chest. Not panic. Not disappointment. Something quieter. A hollowed pause. Back inside, the usual rhythm of the house churns on. Tea is steeped. Tatami is swept. The shamisen plucks its morning scale like a sigh through bone. The other girls buzz about the return of a wealthy rice merchant who tips in silver fans and bad haiku. You nod politely as if you care. But your thoughts drift elsewhere, to the fan, to the envoy, to your riddle now floating somewhere between curiosity and risk. Mainstream historical fact paper messages, whether poems, riddles, or love notes, were frequently exchanged in the Yoshiwara and other licensed quarters. While many were decorative flirtations, some contained sensitive information, clandestine arrangements, or veiled confessions. The houses kept close watch, but even the sharpest eyes missed a few, and those few could change lives. This morning your assignment is strange. You're told to accompany the older Oiran, Lady Michiko, on her morning incense walk. It's not a real walk, of course. It's a ceremonial inspection of the outer garden, part of the seasonal rhythm the house keeps to maintain appearances and reputation. You're not usually invited. Michiko says little as you follow, both of you holding narrow fans, stepping precisely between the gravel patterns. The garden smells like pine new moss and faint plum blossoms. Somewhere, a cicada chirps unseasonably early. She stops near the stone lantern and says, "He's asked for you again. Not today, but soon." You bow, waiting. She continues, "There's some concern." You nod. You know what she means. "You're too quiet," she says. Too still. They're not sure if that means obedience or intent. You lift your gaze just enough to meet her eyes. "Perhaps it means I'm listening." She smiles, not warmly, more like recognition. Fringe Tidbit Senior Oran often acted as shadow governors within the house, managing internal alliances, arbitrating disputes, and sometimes even negotiating with patrons. Their approval, or lack of it, could determine a girl's future faster than any silk sash or poetry scroll. You continue walking. She says nothing else, but you feel her watching you as you go. That evening, you're not scheduled for any formal appearance. You're told to rest, which is another way of saying stay out of sight. So you write. Not a poem, not a riddle, just a list. You call it 10 Things I Am That No One Sees. I once broke a comb and pretended the wind did it. I like the smell of cedar more than cherry blossoms. I wanted to be a musician. I know which floorboard squeaks loudest outside the accountant's room. I memorized my mother's voice but forgot her name. I don't like sake. I pretend I do. I dream in black ink. I miss walking without thinking about how I'm walking. I hate poetry that tries too hard. I wonder what I'd look like if no one was watching. You fold it, don't hide it. You just leave it on the writing table as if it's a draft you're not afraid of. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't sealing your secrets. It's showing them and pretending they mean nothing. Joke number 1. You used to think hiding was strength. Now you wonder if being seen, truly seen, is the more dangerous thing. Later that night, while the other girls sing beneath the lanterns and perform playful dances for a merchant group from Satsuma, you slip into the rear courtyard for air. You stand beside the koi pond, watching the ripples shift beneath the surface. The fish move lazily, heavy with early spring. One bumps against the stone, and then you hear footsteps. Slow, careful, deliberate. You don't turn. You wait. "I read your list," a voice says. It's him. You close your eyes for a moment. "You weren't supposed to," you say. "I know." Pause. "It made me sad," he adds. You turn then. Just slightly. He stands a few feet away, not in formal robes, just a dark wrap and sandals. He looks tired. Or thoughtful. Maybe both. "Good," you say. It was honest. He steps closer. Not threatening. Just there. "Would you leave if you could?" he asks again. You hesitate. "Then I don't know." It's the most truthful answer you've ever given him. Scholars remain divided on what those kinds of answers meant. Some think they were coded cries for help. Others believe they were carefully calculated hedges, non-committal lines of safety. A third theory: that the truth, when it came, didn't matter as much as who was listening. He takes a deep breath. Then quietly, "I'll write you a riddle." You smirk softly. "Just don't make it bad." And for a moment, in the garden's hush, surrounded by shadows and koi and camellia blossoms, there's nothing performative. Just two people half in costume trying to find the shape of sincerity in a world made of screens. You don't see him the next day, or the day after. No summons, no notes, not even a haiku tucked beneath your tea tray. Just quiet, too much quiet. But that's the nature of men like him. They leave ripples and vanish, trusting the wake of their attention to keep you afloat. You've seen this pattern before, only now it's more complicated. You weren't supposed to care if he returned. You weren't supposed to write riddles or lists. And he certainly wasn't supposed to read them, but here you are. Your duties resume formal appearances at evening gatherings, recitations of seasonal poetry, the occasional cup of bitter green tea offered to half-interested merchants. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual, except for how the others look at you now. They don't ask if he's returning. They ask why he hasn't yet. That's the sharper cut. Mainstream historical fact: the most dangerous moment for a favoured courtesan wasn't her rise, but the pause that followed. A delay, a silence, a single missed visit. The absence of attention didn't just weaken her, It shifted the entire architecture around her. New rivals stepped in, old alliances frayed. House mistresses reconsidered investment. So today, when you're assigned a mundane task inventorying incense supplies, you accept it without resistance. The incense room is a narrow chamber, lined with lacquered drawers and small ivory-labeled trays. Each one holds delicate cones, coils, powders, spices from India, bark from Korea, dried blossoms from hidden gardens. The scents rise around you like memories you never lived. The mistress has you count each vial and brush the labels with a silk cloth. She doesn't say why you've been chosen, but you know, you're being watched again. Fringe tidbit: in some elite quarters, certain concubines were tested through subtasks like this. Inventory accuracy wasn't just clerical, it was symbolic. If you could be trusted with the intangible smoke-scent silence, you might be trusted with more, or punished for less. You find one vial with the wrong seal, switched by mistake, or someone's subtle sabotage. You don't correct it, you simply note it silently in your ledger and move on. Correction can be interpreted as defiance. Noting it is a quieter kind of power. When you emerge from the incense room, the world outside feels oddly sharp, like coming out of a warm bath into brisk air. You're still wearing the faint scent of lotus root and pine smoke. Later that afternoon, the house receives a gift. Not addressed to you, not formally at least, but it's delivered to your chamber. A small parcel wrapped in indigo cloth. You untie it. Inside, a smooth white stone polished to a sheen, and a slip of paper. The lantern may be out, but the stone still holds its warmth. That's it. No signature. But it's his handwriting. You close the cloth again, and sit with it for a while. Joke number 1. You've spent your whole life reading metaphors. Now you're living inside one. That night, you aren't scheduled to entertain, but you're summoned anyway. Not to the guest quarters, to the roof. You didn't even know the roof was accessible. A small servant girl leads you through a narrow back stairwell past storerooms and folding screens up a creaky ladder, and suddenly you're above it all. The night air is cool. The roof tiles are warm from the day. You can see the lantern-lit streets of the city beyond the gate, the faint shimmer of canals, the curve of a crescent moon. He's already there, seated on a flat beam, looking absurdly out of place in his fine robes. You sit beside him. Neither of you speaks for a long time. Finally, he says, "I shouldn't be here." You nod. Neither should I. He glances sideways. They think I'm leaving soon. Are you? He shrugs. Duty calls. Politics shift. I go where I'm told. You don't ask him to stay. That's not the role you play. But you feel the question coiled in your throat like unsaid poetry. I want to give you something, he says. You shake your head gently. Don't. I'm not buying you, he replies. I just want to give you something. Pause. Then something small. He opens his hand. A single glass bead rests in his palm. Pale blue, the color of winter sky over water. My sister made them, he says. When we were children, you stare at it. Fringe tidbit glass beads were once traded as luxury items, long before domestic glasswork became common in Edo. For a man of status to give one, especially a handmade one, was a gesture of unexpected vulnerability. You don't take it. Not yet. Instead, you ask, why me? He doesn't answer right away. Then, because you didn't try. You raise a brow. You didn't laugh too loudly, or flatter, or tell me I reminded you of moonlight. You can't help but smile. You don't. He chuckles. Exactly. He presses the bead into your hand. You curl your fingers around it. Cool, solid, real. Joke number 2. Maybe that's all you've ever wanted. One thing that wasn't theatre. You sit there together under the moonlight, saying nothing else. And for a moment you aren't a courtesan. He isn't a guest. You're just two people on a roof in borrowed time. You don't tell anyone about the roof. Not even the girls you sometimes trust when the oil lamps are low and the sake is strong. Not even the house mistress who seems to know everything before it happens. This moment, this fragment of unsanctioned sky, it's yours, and you're keeping it. The next morning you tuck the blue glass bead into the lining of your obi. It's small enough not to be noticed, but just heavy enough that you feel it when you move. It shifts gently with each step, a private weight. You tell yourself it's only glass, decorative, meaningless. But it isn't. That day the house is busy. A noblewoman is visiting from Kyoto, technically a guest, but really an inspector. She isn't here for tea. She's here to observe, to make silent calculations about the reputation of this house. Whether the girls walk with enough grace, whether the oiran's gestures are refined, whether the outer walls need repainting, everyone tightens, bows lower, smiles sharper. You're not assigned to greet the noblewoman, of course. You're not high-ranking enough for that. But you are stationed in the central corridor, arranged casually at your calligraphy table, brush in hand, a fresh scroll unrolling across the desk. Not there to entertain, just to be seen. Mainstream historical fact pleasure houses often arrange their concubines like art, deliberately placed, framed by the architecture, dressed in appropriate seasonal hues. Sometimes they were instructed to read, play music, or write poetry in the presence of noble guests, not as performance, but as silent ambiance, human decor. So you write. Not a poem, a proverb. Something old borrowed from a temple text you copied months ago. A still pond reflects the sky. A rippled pond reflects only itself. You write it slowly, elegantly, letting the brushstroke linger on the final character. You feel the noblewoman pass behind you, no words, no pause, but you feel her watching, then gone. Later, the mistress sends for you. A simple message. You were satisfactory. Praise in this world is a knife dulled on one side. Fringe tidbit. It's said that some concubines never received direct praise until they retired, if they were lucky enough to do so. One former Taiyu reportedly heard the phrase "well done" exactly once, and it was during her funeral preparation when the house seamstress remarked on her ability to lie perfectly still. That night, the roof is locked. You check the back stairway. The servant girl won't meet your eyes. The ladder is gone. Nothing is said, but you understand. It was a temporary door, that roof, a soft escape carved between formalities. And now it's been sealed again. So you return to your chamber. You open your lacquer box. Look at the firefly fan still folded. Then the note, the one he sent about the warm stone. And finally the glass bead. You take all three and hide them. Not in your sleeve, not in your obi, but deep inside your mattress beneath the stitched cotton and folded edges. A dangerous place, but safer than anywhere else. You lie back, eyes on the ceiling again. 32 notches. You count them, then start over. Joke number 1. You've memorized every knot, crack and shadow of this ceiling, and yet it still surprises you with its silence. You dream that night, not of him, but of yourself, standing in the outer courtyard as petals fall. In the dream, you're wearing your plainest robe. No makeup, no fans, and yet no one sees you. You don't know whether it's a relief or a tragedy. You wake before dawn. The courtyard is quiet, the lanterns dimmed to coals. You hear footsteps, light, padded, hesitant. It's the accountant. She bows too low, too fast. A gift arrived, she says softly. She produces a folded paper, wrapped in plum-coloured string. No name. You unwrap it slowly. Inside, another riddle. If the moon casts no shadow, and the fan never opens, who remembers the breeze? You sit down. The words aren't flirtation. They're a farewell. You know that now. He's leaving. Scholars remain divided on whether patrons and concubines maintained relationships beyond their official visits. Some evidence suggests long-distance letter exchanges, secret reunions, even coded appearances in public festivals. But most relationships ended in silence, deliberate, sanctioned, unsentimental. You fold the note, then burn it, not from anger, from necessity. Because carrying too many memories here is like wearing wet silk, it slows. You clings, threatens to drown. Joke number 2. You never thought you'd miss a man who never really arrived. You sit beside the ashes as the sky lightens to grey. Then you rise. Another day begins. You know your lines, your steps. And now you know your boundaries. You wake with the faint scent of smoke still lingering in your sleeves. Ash clings to you even if no one else can see it. There's no official announcement, of course. The envoy's departure is handled the way all important departures are, in this world, quietly, thoroughly, and wrapped in silk. He's already gone by the time the sun touches the garden walls. No farewell procession, no messages left behind, just an absence. The house doesn't pause. It can't afford to. As the gate closes behind his retinue, another guest arrives, an ambitious merchant from Osaka, with a pouch full of gold and a loud laugh. The girls chatter with manufactured delight. The shamisen player plucks a playful tune. You do not perform tonight. You are instructed to rest, which of course means wait. Mainstream historical fact in Edo period pleasure quarters resting was rarely restorative. It was often a coded term used for courtesans who were either being disciplined, repositioned, or simply too emotionally conspicuous for polite company. You've been moved off the board temporarily. Not punished, just benched. You spend the afternoon alone in your chamber, brushing your hair in slow strokes, thinking about everything and nothing. 32 notches in the ceiling. The cool weight of the glass bead hidden beneath your bedding. The echo of his voice on the roof. You wonder if he'll remember you in a year. Or if you'll become part of the many half-formed memories a man like that collects on the road, misty silhouettes in different coloured robes, each remembered by scent more than name. You write nothing that day. You don't touch your inkstone. You don't read. But in the evening, you walk to the veranda and sit beside the paper screen. There's no one to talk to, no one to listen, but you speak anyway. Softly. Goodbye. No one answers. Fringe tidbit. It was common for concubines to perform monologues in empty rooms, part practice, part ritual, part emotional relief. Some houses believed speaking into silence helped cleanse longing. Others believed it simply trained your voice to carry regret more beautifully. That night, a new girl arrives. Fresh from the countryside, probably 15 at most. Her eyes wide, her posture clumsy, her robe too brightly dyed. She's placed in your wing. You are not asked to greet her. You do anyway. She bows deeply, nervously. I'm called Kaoru, she says. You nod. You'll want to speak less loudly. These walls hear everything. She blushes, and you feel a sudden, painful affection for her. Not because she reminds you of yourself, she doesn't, but because she doesn't know yet what not to hope for. You help her fold her robes properly. Show her where to hide her comb when the house mistress comes inspecting. You even loan her a hairpin, the plain wooden one, not the chrysanthemum. Won't I get in trouble? She whispers. Only if someone thinks it suits you too well, you reply. Joke number one survival here is 90% illusion, 10% embroidery. The next morning she brings you a tiny roll of sweet bean paste from the kitchen and thanks you again. It's the first gift you've received in days. You accept it, eat it slowly. It doesn't taste like anything, but it makes you feel a little less removed. Later that day, the house mistress summons you not urgently, not coldly, just firmly. She tells you that your guest ledger has been updated. You've been reassigned for a special event next week, the Plum Blossom Banquet. Important guests, high exposure, low room for error. You nod. You know what this means. You're being returned to the stage. Scholars remain divided on whether courtesans who re-entered circulation after a favoured patron's departure were viewed as diminished or sharpened. Some say such women were considered tainted, used, and passed over. Others argue they carried an edge experience that made them more dangerous, more desirable. You don't know what they'll call you, but you do know you'll show up in your best robe smile like nothing ever cracked you and recite a poem about plum blossoms that sounds just vague enough to feel original. Joke number 2, reinvention is just forgetting with better posture. That evening, as you light your own incense for once sandalwood and chrysanthemum, you take out the firefly fan. You open it. Just once. The paper's still smooth. The paint slightly faded. You wave it once through the air. Then close it. You're not a flame. You're not a shadow. You're both. And you're still here. The days leading up to the Plum Blossom Banquet are filled with rehearsals, fittings, and a kind of tension that floats over the house like invisible mist. Everyone walks faster, smiles tighter. You hear the same phrase repeated again and again in different tones. Everything must be perfect. But perfection, as you've learned, is not about the silk in your robe or the precision of your bow. It's about control of self, of expression, of expectation. You're not aiming to dazzle. You're aiming to leave no trace of error. You're fitted with a formal kimono of pale lavender, edged with silver threads, shaped like plum branches. The sleeves are so long they nearly brush the floor when you kneel, which is the point. Movement becomes deliberate, ceremonial. You are being turned into a seasonal metaphor, beauty that blooms in the cold. Mainstream historical fact, plum blossom banquets, Yume no Utage, were often held to mark the turning of winter into spring. For high-ranking guests, these gatherings were excuses to flaunt poetry, politics, and paramours. For concubines, they were trial by candlelight visibility, raised to a fever pitch. A misplaced laugh or drooping sleeve could ruin more than an evening. The night of the banquet arrives. You're seated at the edge of the main salon, positioned like art, elevated enough to be seen but far enough not to distract from the Oiran's entrance. You hold your shamisen not to play tonight, but simply as a symbol. Your presence is an ornament of refinement. The room is luminous. Dozens of paper lanterns cast honey-colored light on faces powdered and painted to perfection. The air is thick with incense and plum wine. Servants move in coordinated silence, pouring tea, replenishing sweets. Guests arrive in waves. Some you recognize, patrons of the house. Minor lords, the cousin of a daimyo who smells perpetually of horse. But not him. Of course not him. The envoy has left. You know this. You even burned the proof of it. Still, your breath catches for half a second whenever the door glides open. Fringed tidbit plum blossoms were seen in Japanese poetry as a symbol of perseverance blooming while snow still clung to branches. Courtesans often borrowed this imagery in love poems to describe themselves, their endurance, or their subtle warnings to patrons, not to mistake softness for weakness. The evening unfolds like a scroll. Poetry recitations, flute solos, the slow-motion pouring of sake. Then your turn. You're summoned not as entertainment, but as a conversation companion. You rise, glide across the room, and kneel beside a guest you don't recognize. He's young, confident, and clearly unused to being ignored. He greets you with a smirk. You bow. He leans in too close. They say you once turned down a lord. You smile gently. People say many things. Most of them poems. None of them true. The game begins. He asks you riddles, obvious ones. You answer in verses that drift just out of reach. He compliments your hair. You praise the weather. It's fencing, but with chopsticks instead of swords. Joke number 1. Men like this always think they're winning right until they realize they've been applauding your performance without knowing they were part of it. Eventually he grows bored. Moves on. That's fine. You've left your mark. Subtle but there. As the night winds down, you're asked to assist with the final poem reading. You select a tanka from memory, an old one deliberately ambiguous. A branch bends in snow, holding plum buds tight within spring cannot be rushed. Even the moon waits in mist before revealing her face. It lands softly in the room like the scent of melted wax. No applause, just nods, which is exactly what you wanted. Scholars remain divided on whether these poems were coded messages or carefully curated masks. Some believe concubines crafted their verses to hint at desires, warnings, even escape plans. Others argue they were just trained to mirror what patrons wanted to hear. Maybe both. After the banquet, you return to your chamber, exhausted, but strangely, still whole. You remove your outer robe and sit before your mirror. You haven't written since his final note. Tonight you do. Not a message, a list. This one's titled, 10 Things I Can Still Be. A silent room that echoes. A brushstroke no one noticed, but couldn't erase. A branch bent not broken. A joke that no one got, but still made someone laugh. A song remembered not played. A bead in a hidden seam. A pause before a bow. A sigh no one claims. A name whispered once and then mistaken. A woman who did not forget herself. You fold the list and place it beneath your hair comb. Then for the first time in days you sleep deeply and dream of nothing, which in this world feels like freedom. Your sleep is undisturbed. No dreams. No distant music from the guest wing. Just the soft creak of the wood beneath your mat and the slow rise of your breath. By the time you open your eyes, the sun is already brushing the paper screen's gold. The morning after the plum blossom banquet is always quiet. The house moves slower. The makeup trays aren't clattering. No one's rushing to press robes or sweep tatami. Even the senior Oiran are silent behind their doors, no doubt recovering from hours of smiling and delicate persuasion. But not you. You feel oddly clear, not victorious, not bruised, just grounded. You fold your bedding, wash your face, and prepare your tea with movements that are neither hurried nor hesitant. You're not thinking about him. Not today. You're not wondering if another riddle will appear. You've stopped holding your breath. Mainstream historical fact: courtesans were trained in discipline from the start of their apprenticeship. Control of movement, voice, breath, thought. Every gesture had a purpose. Even when they were alone, their behavior reinforced the shape of the performance. But there were stories, rare ones, of women who, after surviving enough, moved through the house as if they owed it nothing. You're beginning to understand that. Today you're sent to assist with the flower arrangement for the entrance alcove, an honor, but also a test. The arrangement must reflect the season, the mood of the house, and most subtly the status of the guest expected later tonight. You work in silence alongside the mistress of flowers, an older woman with fingers like gnarled roots and eyes like sharpened stones. She hands you sprigs without instruction. She wants to see what you choose. You place a single white plum blossom near the base, then 2 fallen petals on the table below it. The flower mistress raises an eyebrow, but says nothing. Fringe tidbit ikebana. The art of flower arranging was practiced as meditation and subtle expression. A blossom's position could indicate grief, pride, humility, or ambition. Placing fallen petals was unusual. Some saw it as a sign of regret, others as quiet resistance. You finish the display bow and step back. Later that day, a guest arrives, but not the kind who requests tea or poetry. A woman, dressed plainly but finely. Her robe bears no crest, which means she's not here officially. Likely someone's wife or sister, or emissary of someone powerful enough not to announce their curiosity. You're summoned. You kneel before her in the small reception room, the scent of sandalwood curling between you. She doesn't introduce herself. She simply studies you. "I heard he favored you," she says. You bow. "I've read your poem," she continues. "The one with the crane." You pause, then bow again. She holds a fan unopened. Her hands are still, her face unreadable. "I'm not here to threaten you," she adds. "I'm just curious. That you realize is worse." Joke number 1. It's always the women, with the softest voices, who ask the sharpest questions. "Did he offer to take you away?" You meet her gaze. "No," you say. Not exactly a lie, but not the whole truth either. She nods. "Then, if he had a..." Longer pause. "Then, it wouldn't have mattered." It never does. That lands heavier than expected. Not as a wound, but as confirmation. She studies you a moment longer, then places something on the floor between you, a folded paper sealed in wax. "From his sister," she says. Before you can ask anything more, she stands and leaves. You don't open the paper right away. Instead, you return to your chamber. You light a stick of incense camphor and citrus, and sit cross-legged on the floor, letting the smoke settle around you. Then you break the seal. Inside is a letter, handwritten. Neat. "He told me about you once. Said you were the only person he'd ever met who could say more with silence than most men could in 5 scrolls. He said you were dangerous, but not in a way that could be fixed. Thank you for being kind to him. He won't forget it. I won't either. K. That's it." You fold the paper slowly. Not like something fragile, but like something that has already served its purpose. Scholars remain divided on whether women like you ever truly formed bonds with one another, sisters of circumstance passing through each other's shadows. Some letters survive, many don't, and the ones that do, often unsigned, often sealed. You tuck this one beside the bead. You feel no need to reply. Joke number 2. Some messages are sent not to be answered, but to remind you that you were real. That night, as the house lights its lanterns and another wave of guests arrives, you're not called. You aren't performing. You aren't reading poetry. You sit in your chamber listening to the footsteps pass your door one after the other. And you are content. Not happy. Not sad. Just still. And sometimes that's more precious than plum blossoms. It's raining today. A gentle, persistent drizzle that slips down the tiled roofs and collects in the stone basins like forgotten secrets. The sound is constant, soft, unhurried, a rhythm that wraps around the house like an extra layer of silence. You're not scheduled for any duties. No poetry readings, no garden walks, no escort assignments. Rain has a way of cancelling everything in this place except thoughts. You spend the morning by the window, a writing board balanced on your knees, ink slow to dry in the damp air. You aren't writing anything meaningful, just copying lines from a borrowed sutra. Your brush drags slightly, with the humidity leaving each character softened at the edges. You like that. A little imperfection, a little blur. Mainstream historical fact: on rainy days, the atmosphere inside pleasure houses shifted. Without guests flooding the corridors, the women had hours to themselves used for practice, reflection, or idle rest. Some houses even had rainy day customs, shared tea rituals, secret games, whispered songs not meant for performance. Time moved differently when it rained. The girl Kaoru still knew peeks her head into your chamber with a sheepish smile. "Would you show me how to hold the brush again?" she asks. You nod. She kneels beside you, stiff and eager, her hand trembling as she tries to form her first kanji. Her first attempt is crooked, her second too bold. You guide her hand on the third, and she gasps, not from success, but from the intimacy of being corrected. You remember being her once, except no one held your hand back then. "You're getting it," you whisper. She smiles. Fringe tidbit courtesans were sometimes encouraged to pass along their knowledge to younger girls, not just out of kindness, but out of control. By shaping what the next generation learned, the house ensured its legacy and kept the illusion of mentorship alive. In reality, older courtesans were often discouraged from revealing too much. Every secret shared was a threat to one's own rarity. You show Kaoru how to grind ink slowly in circles like stirring memory. When she finally copies a character with something close to elegance, she beams. "You're really good," she says. "No," you reply. "I'm just practiced." The rain continues into the afternoon. No visitors arrive. The servants tiptoe. The musicians practice quietly behind sliding doors. You walk the back corridors with no destination, just the soft sound of rain keeping you company. The windows blur. Lanterns flicker gently. You pass the garden and stop at the old plum tree. Its blossoms are nearly gone now, swept away by the wind and water. Only a few cling stubbornly to the dark branches. One drops as you watch landing on the stone path. You kneel and lift it gently in your palm. Joke number 1. You've spent weeks mastering fan placement calligraphy, curves the art of the seductive glance. And here you are transfixed by a flower doing absolutely nothing. You walk back to your room and press the blossom between 2 sheets of blank paper. You don't know why, only that some things deserve to be saved even if they won't last. You find yourself reaching for your glass bead next. You roll it between your fingers, its surface cool and smooth. Not quite blue anymore in the grey light, more like a pale memory of blue. You tuck it into your sleeve just for a little while, not to show anyone, just to feel something that isn't made of silk and rules. Scholars still debate whether objects held by courtesans, beads, combs, scraps of letters were truly keepsakes or just symbols of imagined power. Some argue they were anchors to identity. Others say they were props in a story the women told themselves. You don't argue, you simply keep holding it. Kaoru returns just before dinner. She brings a small folded paper, her first tanka. Rain against the gate, I forgot to fear silence. Ink drips, then settles. A girl with no name learns how to make even paper wait. You read it and nod. You can leave it on the table, you tell her. Her eyes widen. You're not correcting it. No, you say. Not everything needs polishing. She bows. Not deeply, just enough. Then leaves. And you sit in the quiet that follows, holding her poem, the bead, and the memory of a single plum blossom that fell just for you. Joke number 2. Some days you don't need a riddle to feel seen. Just a moment that doesn't try to be anything but itself. The rain doesn't stop, but tonight it doesn't feel heavy. The next morning brings no rain, just a sky painted in the palest grey like a sheet of rice paper before the first stroke. The air is thick, with the scent of wet stone and old wood, and the courtyard glistens, as if someone scrubbed the whole world clean while you slept. You rise early, your body moving before your thoughts catch up. The muscle memory of routine takes over, folding your bedding, brushing your hair, sipping lukewarm tea that tastes like steam and obligation. But there's something different about today. Not in the schedule. That's unchanged. Not in your tasks. Still mind-numbingly precise. It's something in the way your feet feel on the tatami, in the way the air moves when you pass through a doorway, in the way you catch your own reflection in the window glass and don't look away. You're still here. And somehow that feels like defiance. Mainstream historical fact, few courtesans lasted more than a decade in the system. Many left quietly, faded into servant roles, or were replaced by younger, shinier versions of themselves. The ones who endured longest were often the ones who learned how to disappear inside their own roles. Safely, invisible, gently, useful, never loud. But you're not trying to disappear anymore. You're trying to remain intact. Today you're assigned to the poetry alcove. Not to perform, not to entertain, just to sit. As background. It's considered restful duty. You're told to appear thoughtful. That's easy. You've been doing that for years. You take your seat at the low table, by the plum ink scroll, and unroll a fresh sheet of paper. You dip your brush, and you begin writing a list. Not for anyone else, just for you. 10 things I will not forget. The sound of a glass bead tapping against wood. The silence on the roof. The feel of a robe too tight across the ribs. A poem that answered before the question. A name never spoken, only implied. The girl who wrote her own weather. A plum blossom falling without permission. The fan that stayed closed. Laughter behind a screen. That I am still breathing. You fold the list and slip it into your sash. Not hidden, not displayed, just there. A page in the story you've been writing inside yourself all along. Fringe tidbit: while official records of courtesans' writings are scarce, scholars have uncovered fragments, lists, verses, riddles tucked into scrolls, ledgers, even behind mirror panels. Most weren't addressed to anyone. They seemed more like grounding tools, a reminder of the woman behind the painted smile. Later in the afternoon, you're approached by one of the older attendants, the kind who knows everyone's schedule, debts, secrets, and rivalries. She says nothing at first, just places a folded robe in your arms. For your evening duty, she says. You unfold it slowly. It's simple, dark teal, no embroidery, no gold thread, but it's well made, and it fits you perfectly. You're to be on guest watch tonight, she adds. That's unusual. Guest watch is normally reserved for girls who are trustworthy, who know when to speak and when to vanish. It means someone requested you, someone subtle. You wonder who. You do not ask. Joke number 1. Sometimes your life changes because of one whisper in a hallway. Other times it changes because you looked serene while holding a teacup. As the sun sinks behind the roofline, you dress with care. The robe is lighter than what you're used to. You leave your hair mostly down, just a single comb to hold it back. You carry no fan. You wear no scent. You arrive at the guest wing a few minutes early and sit near the paper screen, not quite hidden, not quite presented. The door opens. A guest enters. He's not important, not politically at least. He's a poet, or claims to be, the type who recites his verses too loudly and laughs at his own metaphors. He doesn't request you, but he sees you and says you have a face that knows how to end a poem. You bow slowly, and you have a voice that forgets it started one. Laughter trickles around the room. The exchange is noted. You're seen, but not pursued. Perfect. Later, as you prepare to leave, Kaoru brushes past you in the corridor. She slips a folded paper into your hand without stopping. You wait until you're alone to open it. Her handwriting is shaky but careful. You didn't teach me to be like you. You taught me how to stay myself. Joke number 2, you never intended to be a teacher, but someone was always watching you. And tonight, for once, that doesn't feel like a threat. It feels like legacy. Tonight, your room is colder than usual. Not the kind of cold that bites, but the kind that sneaks in through the cracks, curling around your ankles and rising like breath held too long. You light a stick of incense, camphor and pine, and let the smoke climb slowly toward the ceiling. It doesn't warm the space, but it gives it shape. The way a frame gives meaning to emptiness. You sit on the floor with your writing board and unfold the robe you wore earlier. It still holds the faint scent of roasted tea and sandalwood. You smooth the creases, then fold it again, this time with intention. You place it in the back of your storage box, behind the older robes you rarely wear. You've begun to sort things lately, not out of readiness, but clarity. You're not leaving. That's not what this is. You're simply gathering yourself. Mainstream historical fact: most concubines were never told when their time in the house was ending. They were quietly phased out. Fewer appointments, more rest days, and eventually a farewell wrapped in ceremony or silence. Some were given parting gifts. Others left with only a comb and their memory. You don't want ceremony. You want continuity. Tomorrow is market day, the only time guests from outside may visit the edge of the quarter without appointment. A delivery girl from the paper shop has been bringing you scraps off cuts of rice paper, too uneven to sell, but perfect for practice. She arrives just before lunch. This time she includes a full sheet, creased but smooth, along with a sliver of charcoal ink and a string. Thought you might like to bind something, she says. You nod. You do. So, you begin. Not a poem. Not a letter. A book. Small, palm-sized. 10 pages. Blank for now. But it's yours. Fringe tidbit. Some courtesans kept personal notebooks, small hand-bound collections of verses, riddles, or daily observations. These were rarely shared. Some survived long enough to be found centuries later tucked inside lacquered comb boxes or hidden beneath floorboards. Most simply vanished, worn away like footsteps in tatami. You write one thing on the first page. This is not a performance. And then you close it. That evening you're called to assist in the guest wing again. Not for a prominent visitor, but an older scholar from the provinces. He's courteous, tired, possibly widowed. He requests only tea and silence. You pour it without flourish. Sit with him. Watch the steam rise. Halfway through the second cup, he looks at you, not with hunger or curiosity, but with gratitude. You remind me of my daughter, he says. You smile. I'm honored. He doesn't speak again for the rest of the visit. When he leaves, he bows a little too deeply. You return it carefully. No poems, no riddles, no fans, just presence. And sometimes that's all someone needs. Joke number one in a world where everyone performs the greatest novelty is someone who doesn't need to. That night, you walk the rear corridor again. The roof stairs are still gone, of course. But you pause beneath them anyway, just for a moment, hand resting on the blank wall. You close your eyes, breathe in. It doesn't ache anymore. You return to your room and take out your little book. On the second page you write, even the plum tree stops blooming eventually. But the bark still holds warmth. Later, Kaoru comes to your door. She doesn't knock, just leans in smiling. I was told to ask if you'd like to oversee the new girl's poetry lesson tomorrow. You blink, then nod. Tell her to bring 2 brushes, you say. She'll break the first. Kaoru grins. She's loud. You smirk. They all are at first. She leaves. You sit down, unwrap your inkstone, and begin grinding slowly. The scent of soot and cedar rises into the air. It's quiet, not lonely, just quiet. Joke number 2. Once you measured your value by the number of visitors who remembered your name, now you're finding comfort in being the one who remembers theirs. You dip your brush. Write on the 3rd page, tomorrow, I teach someone how to name silence. You don't read it twice. You don't need to. You already understand it. The new girl arrives just after sunrise. She's younger than Kaoru, barely past childhood, with hair tied in an uneven knot and a smile that's all nerves and too many teeth. Her robe is patterned with birds that seem to be flying in all directions at once. She bows too fast, drops her brush, apologizes, and bows again. You like her already. You offer her a cushion and sit opposite ink, prepared your own brush, resting gently on the edge of the tray. What's your name, you ask? She hesitates. Ray, she says at last. They gave me that. You nod. That's fine. We'll make it yours. You show her how to hold the brush, not too tight, not too loose. You guide her strokes one character at a time, letting the rhythm become a kind of breath. Her first lines are shaky. The second are better. By the 5th, her hand no longer trembles. Mainstream historical fact. Many concubines were renamed upon entry to the house, assigned elegant-sounding pseudonyms that fit the seasonal or poetic theme of the establishment. But it was common for the girls to privately reshape those names, altering the way they signed or said them to claim a sliver of identity beneath the mask. By the time the ink begins to thicken, Ray has written 5 characters. None perfect, all honest. You look at her final line. She's tried to write stillness, but the last stroke tails off too quickly. You touch the page. This one, you say, leave it unfinished. She looks confused. Why, she asks. You smile. Because stillness is never complete. Fringe tidbit in some forms of calligraphy, especially those practiced within the pleasure quarters. Deliberate imperfection was prized. A smudge or broken line could reflect vulnerability, spontaneity, even elegance. Masters sometimes left a character trailing to imply that the thought continued beyond the ink. Ray practices until her fingers stain black. She thanks you 3 times before leaving. That evening you sit with Kaoru over tea. She tells you Ray tripped twice in the hallway and almost spilled broth into the lap of a merchant's wife. She'll learn, you say. She already is, Kaoru replies. You both fall quiet. The silence between you is different now, companionable. You no longer feel the need to fill it with poetry or pretense. Just the occasional sip of tea and a glance that says, you're still here, so am I. Joke number 1. When you were new, you thought the oldest girls had all the answers. Now that you're one of them, you realize the real strength is in knowing which questions matter less. Later, as you prepare for bed, you open your little book. You write on the fourth page, one girl writes too fast, the other bows too low. But both will find balance. Eventually, even the moon learns how to rise slowly. You place the book beside your pillow. As you lie back, you hear footsteps in the corridor, quick, uneven, panicked. A girl outside is crying. You rise. No one asks you to. You step into the hall. Find Ray crouched near the wall, clutching a torn sleeve and wiping her face with the back of her hand. She startles when she sees you. "I'm sorry," she whispers. I didn't mean to knock over the tray." You kneel beside her. "Did you break anything?" She shakes her head. "Did anyone bleed?" She shakes again. "Then it's just spilled tea." She lets out a sound between a sob and a laugh. You reach out gently, smooth her hair. "You'll ruin many sleeves here," you say, "but you won't ruin yourself." Scholars remain divided on whether mentorship among courtesans was genuine or a mechanism of hierarchy. Some records suggest fierce competition. Others hint at secret alliances and private kindnesses that defied the structure. Perhaps both were true. Perhaps what mattered was whether someone remembered your worst day and helped you stand anyway. Ray nods. You walk her back to her chamber. No more is said, but she squeezes your hand before the door closes. Joke number 2. Once you thought power meant being chosen. Now you're learning it might just mean choosing to stay kind. Back in your room, you open the 5th page of your book. You write, "No one sees the moment a girl becomes steady. Not even she does. But the floor stops shaking beneath her. You blow gently on the ink. Let it dry. And sleep, when it comes, arrives like a whisper of something well-earned. The next morning arrives with a rare kind of stillness. Not silence, but stillness. The kind where no one raises their voice. No sandals clatter across the floor, and even the house musicians pause a beat longer between each note. You feel it the moment you wake. The rhythm has shifted. And then the messenger arrives. He's not one you know, young, soft-spoken hair tied too tightly. He bows low and hands the house mistress a scroll sealed in black wax. That alone tells you everything. Someone has died. Mainstream historical fact. Black-sealed messages were rarely used unless the sender belonged to the court, a high family, or someone close to the shogunate. In houses like this, it usually meant the death of a patron or a family member, whose loss required a change in duty or identity. Some courtesans were recalled home if a father died. Others lost protection when a patron passed away. The mistress reads it slowly. Her expression is always unreadable. She says nothing, but she glances at you, and that is enough. You lower your eyes. You don't speak. You feel the air shift around you like incense rising from a cracked bowl. You retreat to your chamber, heart beating with a strange steadiness. Not panic, not grief, recognition. Later, Kaoru slips in and sits beside you. No questions, just quiet presence. You're grateful. Fringe tidbit. Many courtesans developed silent rituals for mourning, especially when grieving someone they could never publicly claim. Some tied white string around a hairpin. Others burned a strip of silk behind the house. Still others wrote letters they never sent, folding them and placing them inside their pillows. You reach for your writing board, not your small book. A single page. You don't name him. You don't describe him. You simply write, "The lantern didn't go out. It was carried elsewhere." You fold it, burn it. Then you wrap your comb in a strip of white cloth, not for anyone to see, just for you. Joke number 1. You once thought grief had to be loud, to be real. Turns out some of the deepest sorrow slips through you like wind through silk, undetected but undeniable. That evening the house is quieter than usual. No one says why, but you can feel it. Your duties are reduced for the night. You're allowed to rest or observe or write. You choose none of those. You walk. Back corridors, outer verandas, the edges of the garden where no guests are permitted. There, near the outer wall, you find something unexpected. A plum pit. Dry, cracked, hollow. You smile. Not because it's a sign, but because it isn't just a fragment. A natural end to something sweet. You pick it up and carry it back to your room. You place it next to the bead. You open your small book to the 6th page and write, "There are goodbyes that leave no footprints, only the shape of where a person once stood." You leave the page open. The ink dries slowly. Kaoru returns after the final bell. She doesn't knock. She brings you a tray of food, warm rice, pickled vegetables, and a soft sweet you haven't tasted since before he left. She says nothing but sets it down beside you, then adds a small folded note. Not hers, his. You stare at it for a long time. You already know it's his. The crease of the fold, the slight slant in the characters. No seal, no signature, just familiarity. You unfold it. It reads, "I thought I had time. If this reaches you, then I did not. But I hope the bead was enough." And the fan stayed folded. You were never mine, but you were real. Your hand doesn't tremble. You place the note in your lap. Joke number 2. It turns out the softest heartbreak isn't the one that rips through you, but the one that fits neatly in your hand and refuses to leave. You look out the window. The plum tree is empty now. The branch is thin and quiet. You write again on the 7th page. Some men leave, others vanish, and a few stay forever by refusing to be chased. Then you place the bead and the note inside a small cloth pouch. You do not hide it. You just place it in the light. Not for memory, not for mourning, for meaning. You're not the same girl who waited for poems. You're not the same girl who folded fans in fear. You're someone else now, someone steady. Someone who can hold loss like silk and still rise when the bell chimes for morning. The house breathes differently after that. No dramatic change, no shifting roles or whispered announcements, but a subtle rebalancing, as if the walls themselves acknowledge your quiet transformation. You are no longer observed with quite the same suspicion, nor with awe. The novelty has faded, and with it the volatility. That's good. You no longer want to dazzle. You want to endure. Mainstream historical fact, longevity among courtesans was rare, but not unheard of. The ones who lasted weren't always the most beautiful or talented, but the most adaptable. They knew when to step back, when to speak, and most importantly, how to carry themselves through transition without appearing wounded. You carry yourself differently now. You walk a little slower, not out of fatigue, but intention. You bow less deeply, but more meaningfully. You no longer speak to fill silences. You let silences shape you. This morning you are assigned a robe inventory. A seasonal shift, autumn robes to be removed, spring silks brought forward. The fabrics are softer now, lightweight, painted with vines and birds in flight. You're joined by 2 junior girls, Kaoru and Rei. They fold clumsily, laugh under their breath, and argue over the difference between coral and persimmon. You correct them once, then let them figure the rest out. They don't need your instructions as much as your presence. You watch them from a short distance, hands still. Fringe tidbit older courtesans who neared retirement were sometimes transitioned into shadow roles. They became silent anchors of etiquette, often unnamed in records yet known by everyone in the house. Their job was not to teach, but to remain as proof that survival was possible. You haven't been offered retirement. You're not sure you would accept it if you were. Instead, you begin to reshape your rituals. You visit the incense room not to assist, but to learn the blends. You ask the kitchen servant about dried plum leaves, how they steep into bitterness and sweetness, depending on the water's temperature. You begin to copy old poems not for practice, but with care, into a second notebook, one you plan to leave behind someday. Not for the house, for the next girl. Joke number 1. You used to think legacy was about being remembered. Now you know it's about leaving something worth finding. That night, the guest wing buzzes with energy. A visiting official is celebrating his appointment, and half the house is summoned to perform. You are not among them. You sit in your room listening to distant music and laughter. You light a single stick of incense, this time clove and pine. You open your book to page 8, and you write, "Tonight, I am not seen." And that is the most restful kind of visibility. You close the book, and for the first time, you allow yourself to hum a tune that has no origin, a melody not meant to be shared or praised, just yours. Later, as you step into the hallway, you see Rei crouched by the wall again. No tears this time, just quiet. You sit beside her. She doesn't flinch. "I'm afraid I'm not getting better," she says. "You are you." Answer. "How do you know?" "Because you asked." She leans her head against the wooden post. You both sit in silence, and after a while she begins to hum softly, the same melody you hummed earlier. You never taught it to her. She just heard it and kept it. Joke number 2. Your voice may not carry far, but it echoes in places you don't expect. Back in your chamber, you open your second notebook. You write only a title across the first page. Lessons I wasn't given but needed. You don't fill it yet, but you will. Not for yourself, for someone who hasn't arrived yet, but will. There's a hush over the house tonight. Not the kind born of tragedy or tension, but one rooted in reflection. A few guests remain in the guest wing, but their voices are low, their laughter restrained. Spring has arrived in full, and with it the brief, aching beauty of cherry blossoms just beginning to fall. You notice it the moment you step into the garden after your evening meal. Petals scatter like forgotten confessions on the stepping stones. The air is thick with their perfume, soft floral, and tinged with the faintest bitterness of transience. You do not rush. You walk the path slowly, arms tucked inside your sleeves, letting the quiet settle in your bones. Mainstream historical fact. The falling of cherry blossoms, sakura fubuki, symbolized impermanence in Japanese culture. Courtesans were often compared to the blossoms, stunning, delicate, and fleeting. Some were even presented during blossom viewing events, adorned in robes dyed to match the trees, making them living metaphors for beauty that could never be held. You pause beneath one of the older trees. Its branches stretch wide, dark, and cracked, heavy with blooms, and yet beginning to let go. A single petal lands on your shoulder. You let it stay. Later that evening, Kaoru arrives with a robe to mend, not hers, Rei's. She tried to hem it herself, Kaoru says, handing you the bundle. She said you'd know how to fix it without undoing the effort. You smile. The seam is crooked, the stitching uneven, but the care is evident. You fix only what's needed, straightening without erasing, leaving her imprint intact. Fringe tidbit in some households, the senior courtesans were trusted not only with performances and etiquette, but also with minor tasks of restoration, mending robes, repairing fans, preserving the unspoken rhythm of the house. These actions weren't glamorous, but they were essential. Invisible work that made everything else seem seamless. You return the robe the next day. Rei hugs it to her chest and bows deeply, murmuring her thanks. You nod, then tell her gently, next time leave one mistake. Why? So they'll know you made it. She grins. Later you visit the tea room. Not to serve, but to steep something for yourself. You choose a dried blend of plum leaf chrysanthemum and a pinch of ginger. It's bitter, then warm. Exactly what you needed. You carry the cup to your chamber and open your notebook again. On page 9 you write, "Some women vanish like smoke, others stay like moss. Neither are wrong, but moss changes the stone it touches." You close the book, but not your thoughts. Instead you walk to the mirror and begin removing your hair ornaments slowly, one by one, each with a story. Each tied to a version of you that once needed to be noticed or envied or safe. You place them in a wooden box and slide it beneath the low shelf. Not gone, just no longer necessary. Joke number 1. When you no longer need to be admired, you finally become someone worth admiring. You lie down early, listening to the house breathe. The faint rustle of movement, the distant splash of water from the inner courtyard, a whispering laugh. Kaoru probably failing to keep a secret. You smile. Tomorrow you'll begin copying a new poem. Not one of yours, one of Rei's. You've memorized the lines already. A girl is not a flower. She is the root, the stone, the shadow where the next one learns to grow. Joke number 2. They called you a concubine, a companion, a pretty thing. But you became something more dangerous, a woman who stayed, and stayed whole. As sleep comes soft and slow, you reach for your little book. On page 10 you write, "The story didn't end. It simply softened." Then you blow out the lamp and rest. The sun rises soft and silver, washing the house in pale light that catches on polished wood and silk wall scrolls. The scent of spring lingers, a mingling of fresh earth, and last night's incense woven so delicately into the air you hardly notice it anymore. You rise slowly. No alarm, no summons. Just the rhythm of your own breath and the understanding that today is something different. There's no official announcement, no guest of importance, no scandal or festivity, but the air buzzes faintly with recognition. Today is your last day, Not in a dramatic way, no final bow, no ceremonial farewell, but something has shifted, and you feel it in your chest like the weight of an unopened letter. Mainstream historical fact: some courtesans were quietly retired by the house once their service reached a natural end, marked not by age but by rhythm. If they no longer pulled patrons or inspired envy, they were gently transitioned into a support role or offered a rare chance at leaving the quarter entirely, often under the condition of silence. You won't be leaving the quarter. Not yet. But your active service is done. You've become something else less visible, more rooted. A kind of stillness in human form. This morning you're asked to visit the seamstress's alcove. A package waits for you there. Inside a robe. Not new, but carefully made. Pale lavender, with a lining of blue-grey silk, unmarked by any crest. A robe for someone not performing. Someone present, but unnamed. You trace the stitching with your fingertips, then fold it. Later, you're summoned not by the mistress, but by Kaoru. She asks if you'll join her and Ray in the poetry room. They've prepared something. A performance you wonder. Number A. Reading. Ray steps forward, trembling, holding her poem. She recites it without looking at the paper. A girl waited under a plum tree. She held a bead instead of a blade. She named every silence she survived. And when they asked who taught her, she whispered, "No one, just someone who stayed." You do not cry, but you do close your eyes and nod. Fringe tidbit: while courtesans rarely became formal teachers, their influence echoed long after their retirement. Their sayings, gestures, and habits were passed down by imitation. Some became so ingrained they were mistaken for house rules, when in truth they were simply the residue of a woman who had endured. You spend the rest of the day quietly. You repair a comb. Steep tea for a junior girl with a sore throat. Copy 2 verses into your second notebook. And when night falls, you step into the corridor barefoot and walk the length of the house once, just once, listening to the echo of your steps and the sound of wind threading through the paper screens. Joke number 1. You spent your whole youth learning how to be noticed. Now you are content to be felt. You return to your room and sit by the window. The plum tree is in full bloom again. You open your little book, the one nearly full now. On the final page you write, "I am no longer waiting. I am still." And that is not the same thing. Then you fold the book closed and breathe. Joke number 2. They never taught you how to leave. So instead you stayed and changed what staying meant. And now it's time to rest. So here you are, sitting quietly at the edge of a life you've spent years surviving, reshaping, and softening into something that could finally hold you. The walls no longer press inward. The silks no longer feel like costumes. And the silence, it's no longer hollow. It's yours. You reach for the lamp fingers, brushing cool wood and warm paper. You move slower now, not from weariness but choice. Each gesture is deliberate, each breath drawn fully. The incense has burned down to a whisper. Outside, a petal slips from the branch and drifts to the ground without a sound. You don't need to watch it land. You already know how the story goes. You place your hand over the pouch with the bead, the poem, the folded note. You don't open it. You don't need to. Some things are held not to revisit, but to remember that you once chose to keep them. You lie down the cushion soft beneath your head, the air cool and clean. There's nothing left to prove, nothing left to fear. You were the girl who learned to hold silence, the woman who taught others how to survive it. And now you sleep. Not because you must, but because you can. End of script. Sweet dreams.